dispel any types of straw men and really introduce the concept of echo chambers, I think, and how they're weaponized, but also, I think also the idea here is that we're looking at influence operations in plain sight and how everything exists within a fictional universe. This is why you see PSYOP actors from January 6th being involved in the present PSYOP. These are closed sets. Now, if you look here, and by the way, it's not just Simpsons, it's widespread, it's everywhere. And it's so pervasive, you can't miss it. And what's more, this has been going on forever. They said Lee Harvey Oswald was inspired by Suddenly and The Manchurian Candidate, 2 Sinatra films. So Frank Sinatra films inspired Lee Harvey Oswald? No. Those films were used to give context for the public to automatically believe the various narratives they were going to be fed with the incoming pre-planned event. Did you know that 2 months before JFK was shot, he and his wife were filming a movie at his house where they simulated his assassination? The Secret Service helped, and they used Heinz 57 for blood. We haven't seen it, but somebody from Vanity Fair has. He shared some shots. He said, hey, look, this shot looks eerily similar to the Zapruder angle of the Ford Lincoln. Like, what a coincidence. Like they were rehearsing. And that just came out last year. All these people talking about the JFK files are missing the fact that JFK simulated his own death 2 months before. Like, I think that's notable. And speaking of closed systems and fictional universes, I went to go see Sinners, and the trailer for Final Destination is very much consistent with what we've been saying. So the Final Destination came out in 2000, and many people said, whoa, it's like 9/11. It starts out with this drastic plane crash. But the story was the character who warns the people to get off the plane has made death mad, created an imbalance. So death hunts down the people who survived the plane crash. So this movie has already been connected with the visual depiction of the horror of dying in a plane crash. And that's what the predictive programming does. It doesn't change reality. They're not causing reality. No, they're providing a context by flooding your imagination and your mind with scenarios. And these are very deliberate, and it's a very consistent thing. So interestingly enough, the new movie, Final Destination's Bloodlines, 25 years after the first one, is actually a prequel. Well, rather, it flashes back to before the first one. So the story is this. The real imbalance didn't start in 2000 with the plane crash. No, it started decades before, where the Space Needle was going to be destroyed. So there was a prophet, a girl who had a vision of a disaster at the Space Needle. And she warns everybody to get off the Space Needle. They do, and nothing happens. So, of course, she's been discredited, but she saved all these lives. Well, that deficit had to be corrected. And that's why the Reaper came after the woman's granddaughter at the site of the airplane disaster. But what you have here now is, in this fictional universe, you have a connection between 9/11, as in the visuals there, and the Space Needle. Interestingly enough, and we've been talking about this for several years, there is more imagery in our entertainment collectively for the destruction of the Space Needle than there was for the Twin Towers. So we have been waiting for the destruction of the Space Needle in a 9/11-like event. And this is the result of a lot of, again, hints in the programming. And this has been the subject of JL, Jurassic Liars, who has been talking about this for some time as well. So it's interesting that, according to his analysis, in a little over a month, on June 11th, something's going to happen in Seattle, and the Space Needle is a huge part of this event. Now, I watched the trailer again, and the person says, I saw what death was about to do, and she's looking up at the Space Needle. And I thought, wait a minute here. This movie comes out next month, like less than a month before it's supposed to happen. Well, where have we seen this before? Well, leading up to 9/11, you had the X-Files spinoff show, The Lone Gunman, with the Twin Towers being targeted by a plane. You had Collateral Damage. You had so many movies that were leading up to 9/11 that prepared us for it. So this is happening in the run-up to 6/11. I think it's just noteworthy. And also, again, the fact that it's connecting 9/11 to Seattle, very intriguing connection here. Rebel Black says, Mud Flood 2, it's a cool story, but I think it's another rabbit hole. Yeah, I think that's one of those things where it's looking in the right direction, but it's probably a lot of misinformation. I like certain aspects of it. I like the people who suddenly start appreciating architecture, and their minds are blown. It's like, no way somebody could carve a statue like that today. Well, no, this is actually what artists do. A lot of them run around with this idea that they can't understand how it works, therefore it must be some high-tech stuff. They 3D printed these cathedrals. That's the divine fallacy. That's the assumption that higher powers must have done this, that kind of reasoning, which is flawed. But I don't dispute necessarily that a mud flood has happened, but I think it was mental. Like the idea of a reset where they somehow wipe everything out and start from scratch. And we've been told this is going to happen symbolically, and it ties into the Space Needle. It all ties into the concept of the Tower of Babel, America as a Tower of Babel. This all connects. One World Trade Tower, 1776 feet high, 1776 is code, not just for the building of America, but the building of the Tower of Babel by Nimrod. And this goes back to the Masonic calendar, which is 4,000 years added to ours. And if you go to 1776 AL, year of light, that's when Nimrod begins its construction. So if you follow the idea of Manly P. Hall's The Secret Destiny of America, the symbol of the phoenix is built into it. The eagle, the American eagle, is really a phoenix, and it represents destruction, purposeful destruction. At some point, it's going to self-immolate and build something better in the ashes. But the Tower of Babel falling is a huge part of this story, and the Space Needle in this story symbolically may just represent that. Does it reach the heavens? Well, yeah. The top of the Space Needle is a UFO. It's designed to be a UFO. The 42-second elevator ride to the top of the Space Needle in Seattle, that's the tractor beam. The UFO is 42 meters wide, but it was designed to be a UFO, which again represents the ones who descend from above or your ascension. So it is something of a modern concept of the tower that reaches the heavens. But again, all these towers tie into the central idea of this one system, this monolithic system, and it being pulled. And this ties in, again, to 9/11, which is a build-up to it. But I think we might be looking, also interestingly enough, the date, would it be 6/11 if that happens? I've been looking at that date and that number for a long time because of its connection consistently with the white nationalist thing. And I've been saying that there seems to be some indication that the white nationalists are going to get their hands on a nuke with the help of Russia, and they're going to take out Seattle. That's been kind of one of the subtexts that I picked up on. And so the 6/11 correlation with the white nationalists, like this white OBL, even connects to Timothy McVeigh, executed 6/11, 2001, 90 days before 9/11, when Muhammad Atta crashed into the tower, another 33-year-old there too. By the way, Trump was shot at 6:11 p.m. in 33 seconds. Rebel Black says, Tim, Nipsey is still getting attention. The narratives didn't die with him. I'm going to have to look into that. I'll have to revisit the whole Nipsey Hussle thing. He was supposed to build something at the Marathon store. I don't know if they followed through with it. But for those who don't know, that was one of these fascinating psyops. He died on 3/31, which was the anniversary of Brandon Lee, by the way, his fake death, which mirrored his father's death. You know, again, Bruce Lee dies in a film where he gets shot during the filming of a movie, and then his son dies because like the Rust accident, takes him out. Fascinating, and it's likely faked. We've gone down that trail a few times. But the Nipsey Hussle thing happened on 3/31. Before that, he was in a video with Roddy Ricch, Die Young. And they have this thing, it's called the Die Young curse. All these rappers that have some kind of mysterious death connected to that song. And in the video Die Young, Nipsey Hussle the singer Roddy Ricch is in a graveyard, and he's looking at his phone, and there's Nipsey Hussle on his phone. The timestamp is 133. And of course, 3/31 is when he dies young. That was a very interesting Holy Week. Like I said last week, it was lit. You had the Cathedral Fire, Notre Dame, which has a lot of stuff with that one. You had the crown of thorns that Jesus wore was going to burn, and there was a 66-minute window for it to be saved, and a fireman ran in and saved it. And it was a fireman who had also been one of the first responders at the Bataclan fake shooting with the Eagles of Death Metal. And he'd been involved in something in Kuwait. So this PSYOP actor saves the crown of thorns. Interesting story. They also had a sighting of a Knight Templar in the tower as it was burning. And on the roof of Notre Dame, they saw that the 3 bee habitats, each containing 60,000 bees, 60, 60, 60, survived the fire. And the 60, 60, 60, the rolling 60s, it all connects to Nipsey. It connects to the symbol of the hexagon and the Knights Templar, their symbol originally being the beehive. And the idea of the Notre Dame burning and then being built back, it's all symbolic. And then the steeple, when it was burning and as it was falling, YouTube misidentified it in the notes as 9/11. But there were some interesting connections between that fire, the Templars, and the story of the Templars being burned at the stake, and the idea of the Phoenix cycle. In fact, Nipsey Hussle's mother said something about our engine is burning but not destroyed. There were all these really ominous statements that were just thrown out there during that week. And that was at the same time, we're talking about 2019, that May, where a 33-year-old wearing a USA shirt set himself on fire in front of the obelisk there in DC, the Washington Monument. He was there on the ellipse. And 33 years prior, during the Reagan administration, another individual did the same exact thing. There's a pattern here that we were picking up on with 33s, the Burning Man. Dave Koresh was 33. Again, McVeigh, 33 executed. What is this? And I think there might be something to, okay, the Templars were disbanded on 322, which is a very significant date to the Skull and Bones, who are said to be a Templar organization. You know, Crowley, we talk about Aleister Crowley, the New Age movement. That's the OTO, the Order Templar Orientis. But they were supposedly disbanded 322, 1312. And throughout the riots of 2020, you keep seeing 1312 spray painted on everything. And the news media is reporting on the riots, the peaceful protests, and they leave the 1312s there. Well, it's not 1312s, it's ACAB, is what I mean, or 1312. See, these are references to the phrase, all cops are bastards. But I thought, what if it's really a reference to who's behind the scenes controlling stuff? You know, Templars, the secret society networks. Challenger Hoax says, you know about the Operation Mindfuck, the use of 23? Okay, I don't know, but I'd like to know, because I was talking about Final Destination, and Final Destination has all kinds of synchronicities encoded into it that the characters have with the number 23. Like 23 miles to the exit, something exit 23 where the big event happens. Challenger Hoax says, Robert Anton Wilson, the guy that wrote the Myths of the Illuminati trilogy. Yeah, he wrote the book called Coincidence about the number 23, and he wrote the Cosmic Trigger. And he correlates the number 23 with the Dog Star. And he says the Dog Star is sending, and he was friends with Timothy Leary, and they had this concept of the starseed transmissions, that the idea that Sirius is beaming messages down to those who can receive it that somehow get them to achieve some enlightened state, that we are being upgraded. Like, you know, you download your new version of your iPhone. Well, we're getting our new download from Sirius, according to Robert Anton Wilson. So I'm reading his book, The Cosmic Trigger, because he says Sirius is the cosmic trigger. And then I go see and this was right after Robert Anton Wilson died, because he died on January 11th of the year that Truman Show came out. So I was in the theater watching the Truman Show, and I had Robert Anton Wilson's Cosmic Trigger. So when I'm watching the Truman Show, I'm like, wait a minute here. He wakes up from the movie because the Dog Star fell from the sky, the satellite that represents the Dog Star, and that triggered his awakening. So I'm like, wait a minute, there's a connection here, because his other movie that came out following this was called The Number 23, about somebody going mad reading a book about some guy who had a ton of synchronicities with the number 23. Well, guess what book that was? That book, The Number 23, Jim Carrey movie, had to have alluded to Robert Anton Wilson's book, Cosmic Trigger. And at the end of the movie, Jim Carrey's character is trying to figure out who wrote the book. So he sends 23 packages to the mailbox of the author, and he goes to meet the guy. And the guy who picks up the packages happens to look like Robert Anton Wilson. I thought that's kind of weird, because again, Wilson had just died. And he says, what does 23 mean? He's trying to get an answer out of him, and the character takes out a knife and cuts his own throat. Well, the subtitle of the Cosmic Trigger is Final Secret of the Illuminati. And if you read the blood oaths, you know, in these secret society groups, the oath is if you spill the secrets, you get your throat cut. But anyway, it was the Jim Carrey movie, The Number 23, and The Truman Show that got me to look closer at movies. That's when I started to say, wait a minute here. Why is there a level of meaning in these movies that couldn't possibly be targeting the ticket buyers? At first I thought, okay, these are Easter eggs for nerds. But then I looked closer and I thought, wait, Jim Carrey's characters in various movies are alluding to the Dog Star in different ways. And then you look at his role on the world stage and how he is known for his new ageism. He even has this great breakdown of the number 23. It gets to be pretty clear. And this is when I coined a phrase, Hollywood archetype casting. Because, you know, you got typecasting. You know, you pick this guy because he fits a certain type of archetype. But what if they're a typecast? But what if their archetype has a deeper meaning? So Jim Carrey is very much like a fool in the Truman Show. And if you look at the meaning of the Fool card, it's somebody beginning the journey into enlightenment by recognizing that he doesn't know anything. But again, I started to recognize there's some esoteric element in the movies. And following that, I think that's kind of anyway, it was that movie. That was why it's kind of interesting to me too, that the Cosmic Trigger was in my hands when I see somebody and I recognize Sirius. I see somebody in the movie awakening because of Sirius, to the fact that he's living in a movie. And what are we talking about every day? We're talking about our movie, our fiction, our propaganda enhanced consensus worldview, our collective Truman Show. Okay, Challenger Hook says 23 is the number of the Temple of Psychic Youth. Right. And the Discordian society. They worship the goddess Eris, the goddess of chaos, and they ascribe the number 23 to her as well. So the 23 connects to chaos, the dog star, and I'll have to look back into. I have a book over here. In fact, you mentioned the Illuminatus trilogy. I have book 2 over here. Robert Anton Wilson. He has some interesting work that might be worth examining in the context of what we're doing, because he came up with this concept he called reality tunnels, and how people get locked into a subjective reality tunnel by cognitive bias. And he said, do an experiment, because he was all about recognizing this idea that we convince ourselves of things. He says, what the thinker thinks, the prover proves. And he said, if you want to see if you're being followed, for example, just tell yourself, yeah, I'm being spied on by the government, and I'm going to write down evidence of this happening over the next week. And he said, over the next week, now, if you see somebody working on a power line, you're going to notice this. You might see somebody walking by, they look at you, you're going to notice this. The idea was that if you set your cognitive bias that this is true, you have this presupposition, I'm being followed, you could justify it. Your mind will locate information that could support that. So his books delve into synchronicity, coincidence, but also where we can let our beliefs take us out of objective reality, the power of beliefs to distort our perceptions. Portal Complex says, Angels and Demons fired me off, highly recommended. Dan Brown, Angels and Demons. Dan Brown wrote Inferno, the movie. Okay, Inferno is about a super virus that shuts down the world. The movie's Tom Hanks opens up where he's locked down in, I think, in a hospital. He wakes up in a hospital in Italy. But in real life, Tom Hanks, when COVID came out, was locked down in Australia. But meanwhile, Italy had been like the first place to lock down. But the super virus was called, I think it was called Inferno or something. But anyway, yeah, Dan Brown movies, Tom Hanks, very interesting links there. And that was a pretty good one. I remember reading it one. It was about the Vatican, in fact. We're talking about the Vatican. And I think it had to do with the idea that Christ was married, and at that time it was controversial. Okay, we've covered up quite a lot here. There's going to be more tomorrow. Tomorrow is Infinite Plane Saturn Day. So I'm not here making predictions. We're just spotting the trends. But if I wanted to make a prediction, I would say keep our eyes on a sudden, unexpected exit of Laura Loomer from the world stage, and Seattle, the Space Needle in particular, having some kind of a disaster. And that's scheduled for 6/11. So mark your calendars accordingly. Thanks for the comments. We had a great caller tonight. That was from the Challenger Hoax channel. I'll make sure I get that link. Again, Challenger Hoax on YouTube. I'll watch his videos. I'll comment on them tomorrow for Infinite Plane Saturn Day. So have a great faked. We've gone down that trail a few times. But the Nipsey Hussle thing, to discuss pyramids floating in the air, like she is an astronaut in every sense of the word. If being an astronaut is, it says 23 is the number of the prover proves, was locked down in Australia. But meanwhile, Italy had been like the first place. Very interesting links there. At that time, it was controversial. Okay, we've covered up quite a lot here. There's going to be more tomorrow. Tomorrow is Infinite Plane Saturn Day. So I'm not here making predictions. We're just spotting the trends. But if I wanted to make a prediction, I would say keep our eyes accordingly. Make sure I get that link. Again, Challenger Hoax on YouTube. I'll watch his videos. I'll comment on them tomorrow for Infinite Plane Saturn Day. So have a great evening. This is Chief Crow.